You're listening to the Climate Sheroes podcast for empowered women towards a resilient planet with your host, Chipo K. Back to Climate Sheroes, where we get to have a conversation with amazing ladies who are helping us understand the term that comes with climate change and sustainability and everything that falls around in that subject. And today I have a lovely lady who comes highly recommended. Yes, it's true. Her name is Andile, and Andile is a climate activist and a girl rights advocate. And I don't want to take words from her. I just want her to introduce herself. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chipo. Hi, everyone. My name is Andile Ashley Magunje. I am a podcaster, writer, and film actress at Amplifying Girls Voices through digital arts, where we deal with girls' sexual and reproductive health and rights. And I'm also a climate activist. At the moment, I'm working on trying to fuse both of these different works together. Yeah, so that's me.
So, with storytelling, there is always an opportunity for anything, anywhere. Because I remember someone even asked me, like, why are you now doing Isn't It Climate Change? Are you not supposed to be, just focusing on content creation and social media? And I was like, you know what? I'm a storyteller. So everything just falls wherever it goes. So, let's just dive into it, right? So in this episode, we are talking about, sustainable living and women taking up the adaptive lifestyle, as one of the ways we have to deal or ways of mitigating the effects of climate change. And, in one of the previous episodes, we also established that, us being in Zimbabwe is primarily an agricultural focused country. Like most of our living comes through agriculture. And knowing that the majority of our population is also based in the rural areas. The people who live on subsidiary farming, which means their income comes from farming. Their main source of food also comes from farming. And, now with climate change happening, which means most of their lives are affected. Before we even look at women and girls in particular, with everything that they now have to do in, finding ways as the primary caregivers, finding ways of taking care of their families and making sure the families are fed and they have things that they need. So, now there is a call for sustainable development, sustainable living. And one might wonder, what exactly are we talking about when we're saying sustainability in the first place? And when we're going into sustainable development, what are we talking about? Where are we going? Where are we coming from with this?
Okay. So I think sustainable living is all about living with the future in mind. You're not just thinking about today and now. You're also thinking about tomorrow, and a tomorrow that involves coming generations that are coming after you. So I think that's what sustainable living is about. Your lifestyle is not just about you. It's not about the current moment only, but it also takes into account that your children, your children's children are also going to depend on the same resources that you depend on. And I think sustainable development now is, I can say development is happening all around the world, like continuously, you can't stop it. And now when we're now talking about sustainable development, we're saying that the economic practices that we are doing, we're saying that the perspectives we have, the programs we're implementing, the policies that we are framing are also thinking about the future. So I think that's what sustainable development is.
All right. So, when we're looking at sustainable development, what does it look like now? If we're putting it in practical means, what does it look like? What am I doing when I say, okay, this is now sustainable living here in the urban areas? What are we looking at?
Okay, now that you've said urban areas, I have to think deeper because I was now thinking, okay, let me just give a brief example of the first thing that came to mind was like, if you are a fishing community, for example, in your fishing practices, you need to ensure that you are not only taking the fish out, but you're also replenishing the natural resource. You are make sure you're breeding more fish. You're making sure that there's maybe a balance between how many fish take out, how many fish you put in. Is the water, the chemicals in the water, is the water clean? Is it not polluted? You're also looking at the people who are fishing those resources. The population around. Is the population growing? What does population growth mean in the next 5 years for that particular natural resource that people are depending on? We're also looking at the type of people, the age groups that are there, how many youths are there, how many children are there, how many old people are there, how many women are there, are women being involved in the fishing or it's just only male dominated? So we're looking at it economically, we're looking at it culturally, socially, religiously. So I think sustainable development in practical looks at all the aspects of like a particular community. And since we're talking about Zimbabwe being dependent on natural resources, we now look at a particular resource. Uguti, is this fishing community living in a sustainable manner? And is whatever development practices they're trying to put into place actually sustainable? If they're going to improve their fishing techniques, if they're going to build some sort of wall around, is it sustainable? Is it going to help the future generations?
Yeah, so a very funny story. We were once invited for an event, and the theme was sustainability. And people were scratching their head saying, "Oh, does this mean now we have to wear leaves?" And I know we had the same look. The look that you just gave me, we had the same look. So someone was like, "Does it mean you now have to be wearing leaves or plastics? What is it exactly about?" And well, the host was like, "You have to interpret sustainability in your own terms, what it means in your own terms." And I just like how you mentioned about the resources and stuff, which means, when you are involved in all these sustainable development projects and stuff, you have to be mindful of the resources that you're putting in. For example, fishing. What chemicals are you using? Or even in agriculture on its own, because we do have chemicals that are harmful to the soil, that are harmful to, the surrounding and the undergrowth and all those things. Because I know a certain community, they eventually adopted the use of, what do you call them? The chemicals that kill weeds in your fields.
I'm not sure what they're called.
Yeah, I'm sure when it's pesticide. So there is that for agriculture.
Yeah.
I am sure I will get the name of it soon. And instead of, doing all the hard work of cultivating and plowing and stuff, they just distribute that chemical in their farms. And at some point, I was found wondering, what does that mean? Because, each area has its own ecosystem. The weeds, they serve their own purpose. There are worms and all those other living and non-living creatures on the ground. They all serve the same purpose of, providing nutrients for your crops as well. So after 3, 4, or 5 years, what happens there? So that's a great point that you just made there. So coming back to, adaptation, what does it mean? Now we're not talking about adaptation. We are looking at, you see, in Bulawayo specifically, we are facing, the effects of climate change in real time and the harshest ways. And the most effect is water. And there are calls for where we need to adapt. How are we adapting? What does that exactly mean? Because I haven't really heard tangible adaptation methods out there, except for water harvesting. Sure, water harvesting, but also there is not enough rain to do that. So what are we talking about? In Bulawayo terms, when we're saying we are now adapting to the climate that we are now exposed to.
I think when you talk of adaptation in urban setting, looking at the water crisis that we have, I feel like it has taught people to use less water and be conscious of like how you use the water that you use. Even when water is back, like I just find myself being more like conservative, like conserving the water more. I don't use as much water anymore. I don't just use water and just throw it away, I find myself just storing the water. So I think that's part of adaptation that has been happening to a lot of us in Bulawayo. And so reusing water, recycling, and it's still something that I have to think about, to be honest. And then looking at other ways of adaptation besides water, I think even when we look at how like poor rainfall has affected food systems, like people have to buy everything now. People don't grow their own food anymore. I don't remember the last time we went to my rural home to say it's planting season, Lima and all that. So I think if people take it into their own hands to say, okay, let me learn more about maybe drought-resistant crops, vegetables, foods that don't require much water, and try to even grow my own food, because you can't trust another food company or another agricultural company to do that for you. You need to make sure that you're being accountable for like sustainable living. So you need to, just plant your own food, make a little garden where you're making sure that you're not destroying like the natural environment, and also try to conserve water. It's not easy. Like sustainable living, I feel like it's still something that is so far-fetched for a lot of people, especially in Zimbabwe, because even the climate crisis itself is not something we've actualized. It's not something we see as being very real. So adaptation is still something that's on the horizon. But I think those are some of the little ways in which people can try to adapt. But knowledge is power. So a lot of us need to read more, need to study more, because we have better access to like digital media as compared to people in rural areas. So we can study more about like adaptation. That in itself is a means to adaptation. Yeah.
So basically, what you just said, I don't mean it in any way, but when we are talking about adaptation, for us, especially most of us in Africa, the picture that I'm getting is that adaptation is still a vision board. We are still trying to figure out what it should look like for us. And, you mentioned the rural areas. And, in rural areas, the people from there, like 80% of them, they do not have the option or the privilege of saying, if we don't have food at home, we'll go to the shops and buy. Exactly. So to them, when you're telling them to, take adaptation means, adaptative means English, what are they supposed to do? How are they looking at it? Because when there is no rainfall, this affects their food stores, and, their food security is also affected. And that also opens a gap, like a huge gap in other development areas like education, employment, and all those things, because now they have to focus on the gap that comes with, securing food for them, for themselves and their families. So what areas, or what can they do, or how can they, deal with such a situation?
That's very true. I like that you're bringing in like a different lens into adaptation, where we're not just talking about food, finding food and what, but we're also looking at how climate change is affecting our lifestyles in terms of education. What does it mean for going to school? What does it mean for going to work and stuff like that? So I think for people in the rural areas, personally, I don't know. I feel like my eyes and my mind is always more focused on people in the rural areas or their way of living. Because I feel like in the first place, they are more prepared than us when it comes to climate change. Because they've always had these practices from long back that conserve the environment, that preserve it, and I feel like they're more resilient than us. Because Tina, here when water goes, all you want to do is like maybe store it in a container and then wait for it to come back. But that side, even if they don't have a bowl, they know how to dig those holes next to the river, what. All those different creative ways that they have of living that are more like diverse than what we do here. So I think for them, adaptation looks like going back to like agroecology and not just not cutting down trees, not using pesticides, not trying to grow like 5 hectares of vegetables, but just allowing things to just grow as they come, like trees with vegetables, with what, because that's how it's like in most villages. So I think in terms of food systems and water, that's adaptation for them. And then where the crisis is and where it's most disheartening, I think, is now when it comes to education. What does it mean for the time that they have to dedicate to school now, given what schools are already far away for them? And what does it mean for work? What does it mean for personal development? What does it mean just for time to be a child and have fun? Most kids now, they grow up too fast, like in the rural areas, because they now have to work to help their parents and all that. So I think in terms of adaptation, in terms of education, like it's getting worse and worse. The education gap keeps on widening in education for children living in the rural areas, particularly for girls.
Yeah, so speaking on that, the education part being affected, it's because of how they have to stay at home. Like most of the children there, they live with the elderly. Basically ogogo labokhulu. So when the rainy season comes, there will be days where they are told you have to help out in the fields. Or when the water situation becomes worse, because there are times when that happens, it's either you have to leave school early, meaning mid your lessons there, you have to think about going home to go and look for water, because they now have to travel for some kilometers to get water, or they are late for school, or they don't even go to school at all. And then with other, income issues, when there is no money coming in to pay for their school fees, they will literally just stay at home. And now this actually, gives us a repeating cycle of poverty. And with poverty, it is difficult to tell someone to not think about their next meal and go out there and learn, or to not think about their next meal and send their child to school. It becomes difficult to make them understand that. And now it keeps us in this cycle and it will keep all these other, development issues. There will always remain a vision board, something that we will always have to think about and tell ourselves, oh, we need to start, thinking about adaptation, start thinking about sustainability and all those things. Yeah. So looking at all those sustainable development and adaptation, we're looking at all those things. Why is it important for women, and especially women and girls and societies? Why is it important for us as a society to be involved in sustainable development? What problems are we solving?
I feel like it's important for like people, just communities at the grassroots level, to be involved in sustainable development, because people at the lowest are the ones who are most affected. People who are most affected by the digital divide, the education gap, they are the ones who are most affected by climate change. People who are in communities that have deep religious or cultural beliefs are the ones who are most affected by climate change. So I feel like that's why people should be involved. But I know people should be involved, but I feel like how can they be involved, And involvement can best come about if the leaders that we have and if the initiatives or programs that exist find ways to expand their spaces and involve these people who are at the lowest levels. So I think personally, I like to advocate for like things to change at the top so that there can be diversity at the table, so that more people can be involved in the conversation. So I think the more diverse voices we have, the more diverse perspectives and needs we are able to meet. So I think that's why it's important for like people to come together and also for people to realize that we cannot have sustainable development if we're not involving everyone. And when I talk about involving everyone, I like to spotlight gender mainstreaming. I like to talk about why gender and why women and girls are important in the climate movement. Because girls and women are the ones who are most affected, right? And if we do not involve them in the planning of these, there are so many initiatives and programs that are coming up that are related to like climate change. But how many of them put women or gender issues at the forefront? How many of them can actually see that you cannot solve the climate crisis without solving the gender inequality crisis? So, yeah, I feel like it's very crucial for us. I'm now even thinking about how Sustainable Development Goal number 17 is partnership for the goals. And I was not there when they wrote that. I don't know who brought that up, but I love that person because that person is seeing that these different goals, there's someone who works on sustainable development goals related to climate change. There's someone who works in gender space. There's someone who works in health or whatever space. And the reason why that person felt it's important for partnerships between all these different goals is because they can see the interconnectedness between all these different issues.
And also, to see that the goal is the same. Development.
Exactly.
In a sustainable manner.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, that's just my jumble of thoughts about that.
So, before I give you a little fun fact that I have. I don't know if it's that common, but whenever I tell people, they are, mind blown in a way. So, in the Zimbabwean context, given the resources that we have, and say if someone now needs to venture into sustainable agriculture, what examples are there? What can they do? The steps that they can take for that? Yeah.
All right. Like sustainable living in general and how we can adapt given the climate crisis
like
that we
the
have.
Examples?
Okay. Before we go to agriculture, I think people buy a lot of clothes, to be honest. I feel like a lot of us, I know this is going to sound like maybe cheesy or whatever, or like it's a European perspective, but I feel like wearing less clothes is also very important. Like, I feel like in Zimbabwe, we are big on buying clothes. Like, we buy clothes a lot. That's why, like, if you go by 6th Avenue there, you keep on going down. There's like a strip.
Everyone is buying clothes. Everyone is selling and buying clothes. I was like, I almost said you are now attacking most of the people here in our city's source of living. Because almost everyone is selling clothes. Almost everyone is buying clothes. And I sometimes ask myself, who is wearing all those clothes?
Imagine. A lot of us have a lot of clothes we don't wear. Even I do. Like, I also have a lot of clothes I don't even wear. And I'm like, hey, all these clothes that we keep on buying, where does all this material end up at the end of the day? So I think if people were just to be less on clothes, maybe that would also help the environment. And also, I think that when we look at agriculture and like the resources that we have, we're not too far gone into like environmental degradation. So there's some rehabilitation that can still be done. I think if everyone decides to grow their own food. Like, I cannot stress that enough. I feel like the more you're buying food from someone who's doing it commercially, you don't know what they're putting into the soil. You cannot make them accountable for whatever they're doing to the environment. Remember, they're chasing money. And the best way to go green is to just do it yourself. Like, grow your own food. Just step away from buying from those commercial growers of food. So I think that's one way of adaptation. It'll really help the environment. 2, don't cut down trees. Like, I feel like everyone has this mindset that if I want to build a house, if I want to build, I don't know what I want to build, or when I want to do something, I'm just trying to construct something, I have to clear the land. I have to cut the trees.
And this is cutting the trees without a plan for replenishing them. Yeah.
We just have this idea that, okay, this house of mine, this Airbnb of mine will look nicer without trees. You know, in February, I went to Malawi and I saw a whole different world in Malawi. I'm not going to lie. People don't cut down trees in Malawi. You will stay at a hotel and it looks like it's in the middle of the jungle. Like, there's just trees everywhere in front of it. Even at the State House, I saw so many trees. Is it like the State House? I'm not sure. But some government house that we passed by, it had so many trees. I'm not going to lie. So I feel like it will help clean up the air. It will help improve the carbon sink. Even though I know right now I'm talking about rehabilitation, which is not really much of adaptation, but I feel like it's also crucial. And then also on the adaptation, I think we can also improve, like, in terms of water practices. We can still get better at recycling water. We can still get better at reusing water. Don't just throw away the water. You can wash plates with it. You can put it in the garden. You can do so many different things with the same water. So
yeah, that is true. All right. So here is my fun fact in other things that we can do for adaptation. I discovered that a chili plant is a natural pesticide, natural insecticide, especially when you're dealing with aphids. If you have those chili plants in a vegetable garden, they tend to go away. There is something that is released in the air by that plant that I am yet to find out what it is. And this is something that I discovered while conversing with an old lady. So this is a fun fact, but I am not backed by science when I'm saying this. But I made some observations after I was told that. I looked around and I realized that whenever a garden has a chili plant, they are less likely to be affected by aphids than a plain.
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
So, yeah, we need to find, I think there is still research on finding plants that can help with, insects and all that, instead of continuously using chemicals and all of that. Yeah. So, Andile, we have come to the end of our podcast. I think time is actually not on our side anymore. So do you have any parting words of advice, words of wisdom?
I think I would like to just encourage everyone who's listening to this to learn more about the environment, to learn more about climate change. And climate change is real. The climate crisis is real. Just educate yourself and you will realize how much work, how many more hands we need, how many more environmentalists and climate advocates we need. And also, I just want to say that the climate crisis is not just for climate advocates, environmentalists, or people in the space. It's for everyone. It's for teachers. It's for educators. It's for people in the gender space like me, because I'm in both spaces. It's for people in technology. It's for both young and old. It's for everyone, because one way or the other, you are affected by the climate crisis, even though you may not realize it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Andile, for coming through. I appreciate you, and I'm sure the listeners will appreciate you as well. That was Andile, a climate activist and a girl rights advocate, telling us about, sharing what her knowledge and experience has been about when it comes to, sustainable development. Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
You are listening to the Climate Sheroes podcast presented to you by Chipo K with support from the Zimbabwe German Society. Check the show notes for more information about our guests and the amazing works they were doing towards climate action, and more resources and information on what you can learn and do towards the SDG 13 as your contribution to our combined efforts to mitigate climate change.